Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, January 17th, 2022. Time for another show. Despite the fact that it is a federal holiday today, we don't abide by that whole federal holiday thing. Because, okay, well, I don't know. Because you're at home, perhaps you have the day off, and you would like some accompaniment. It is Martin Luther King Day. That is to say, National Day for all white people to tweet out the I Have a Dream speech or something quite like it, and not read the whole thing all the way through. Apparently, you'll learn some larger lessons, and you know that's dangerous to do. So just stick with the one that Republicans say is okay because it says everybody is equal even though they're not. And whatever. You know how it goes. We don't treat everybody equally. You know that's the case. And that's, I guess, probably the biggest differentiation in how people approach the day. I suppose people like, well, white Republicans sort of tweet around the I Have a Dream speech and MLK Day. If anything to them, besides just a day off, is a day to celebrate the completion of the mission, I suppose. You know, the United States no longer has any more racism, because, of course, we have Martin Luther King Day, and that's all there is to it, as opposed to a reminder of unfinished work or something like that. If you say the work is unfinished, that is critical race theory, and it's banned. If you say we are post-racial, then it's all good, and I guess you can go ahead and do it. But remember back when we were racial, but now we're post-racial. And back then, we killed that guy. Anyway, so the point is, it will be marked unequally, which is ironic given the message, all around the country. But look, I'm glad for the holiday, because if it wasn't for the holiday, we would have to depend on the snowfall to close schools to keep kids away from one another and from their teachers while Omicron variant is still spreading. And the snowfall probably wouldn't have done the trick. I don't know. We'll see. Although they're pretty. They got a hair trigger when it comes to closing schools around here, so it is possible. But we got a combination of snow and then later some rain that made everything very sloppy, but also helped the snow plowing hold up. And temperatures hovering just, well, not yet above freezing, but soon to be above freezing. So it might actually keep the streets clear today, and that will become an issue because, of course, tomorrow, back to school. And you may have heard by now that here in Virginia, with the new governor in place, and I guess I thought he was inaugurated on the 12th, on Wednesday, for some reason, but I guess that was maybe the new General Assembly that were sworn in. And it appears, I don't pay close enough attention to the inauguration date of the governor here in Virginia, but it appears that was done on Saturday, because by Sunday, we were all debating the brand new executive orders, or purported executive orders from Glenn Youngkin. Some more egregious than others. The one that resonates most around here, because we have school-age kids at the headquarters, is rescinding the statewide mask mandate for schools, which purports to forbid the various local school boards from requiring masking. And that, of course, we are going to, quote-unquote, listen to parents. Not me. I'm a parent. You don't listen to me because I want the opposite of what Governor Youngkin wants. And, about, I don't know, maybe 20-30% of my neighbors would like to see some sort of mask optional situation. Probably a good 15% would like to see masks forbidden. But then again, here in Loudoun County, despite the focus on us in the election, Loudoun County overwhelmingly rejected Glenn Youngkin. Even more so, as I understand it, was the case nearby, neighboring county of Fairfax. So Fairfax County, Arlington County, Richmond. I don't know whether it's official here in Loudoun, but we certainly had members of the school board saying, yeah, it looks like we're going to vote to ignore the executive order and go ahead with our mask mandate. By the way, I'm not entirely sure what the effect of even an effective rescission of the mask mandate would look like, because prior to the pandemic, there were very strict rules against masking, actual rules against masking in public schools, but that wasn't about public health. That was about having kids covering their face for whatever reason with bandanas or masks at Halloween, and they didn't like it for security purposes, and it was strictly forbidden. So it was a real big kick when the kids came back to school and they were allowed to wear masks, and it was kind of funny because they all knew about the ban on masks. But I wonder whether that becomes effective again, as opposed to, say, taking the moderate approach, something you might expect a person in a fleece vest to advocate. Well, the masks will be optional. It's just that you can't force the kids over the objections of the parents. The parents who know everything about how school should be run, up to and including whether or not Frederick Douglass was the one in the debate with Abraham Lincoln. That's kind of the level we're coming in from. Anyway, that's where we are. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. Bill knows that it was the case. Due to an innocent misunderstanding, he predicts, Kagro X spends 2 hours talking about the Protestant Reformation of 1517 to commemorate Martin Luther King Day. Yes, to commemorate Martin Luther Day. Yes, okay, I'm off track. I see. I left, I wanted to shorten things and keep it, neat and clean and keep the word count down. You know how it is on Twitter. I ran out of characters when I got to the king part, and, well, okay, so 1517, not 1619, but 1517 on the mind today. All right. Many things to catch up on as well from around the state, around the country, here in the neighborhood. A lot of other executive orders purporting to change things up a bit here in Virginia. Let's see. Also saw lots of complaints about the elimination of the diversity and inclusion and equality section of the governor's website. I mean, the governor's website is, less of a concern, say, than the governor's governance, but I think that's supposed to be indicative of the direction he's going. Also, the elimination of certain governmental departments. I guess the folks at the Attorney General's office that was dedicated to double-checking, triple-checking, and quadruple rechecking death sentences and sentencing equality here in Virginia closed up shop as well. So I guess we're going to get back to the practice of there is no such thing as executing an innocent person. We'll just go ahead with everything because law and order. Sure. Oh, and by the way, we're pro-life. So anyway, I'm sure we'll work all these things out in succession and get them all nailed down in the near future. All right. Let's see. Other items up for discussion today. Quite a bit of activity on Twitter, but most of it Virginia-focused over the weekend, but we'll try and cast a wider net. I did see something interesting today. Why did this cross my screen? I can't remember already. I've already forgotten what we were... oh, yes, right. I don't know how this got there. It was Brandon Friedman that brought this thing up. Or brought it to my attention, I guess. I'm sure this would have escaped my notice entirely, since it came from I don't know where. But let's see. Is this the... let me see if I can find his tweet. Somebody, somewhere. Who is this dude? Nobody in particular. A regular guy. Regular people are entitled to tweet every once in a while too. A Marine veteran, so he claims, Tyler, who tweets under the handle of Ironworker05. Not Ironworker04. That's a different guy. But Ironworker05. I don't know how he got a hold of such a thing and why it bothers him so much. But he got a hold of a video of a couple of women active duty in the Army in their barracks and in their PT uniforms. And they've decided to put together one of those, is it TikTok? I don't know. But anyway, we'll just imagine everything is TikTok. Anything that happens on a little video where there's dancing is probably TikTok. And there you go. They are dancing. They're doing a dance routine together, synchronized dance routine, and having a good time. And this disturbs Tyler immensely. He's furious and tweets, "We're doomed." And then a bunch of hashtags because he's conservative. And you have to do that. If they say anything, like I'd like, a ham and egg omelet, please. Although, why would he say that? I guess maybe bacon, cheese, and egg biscuit might be more along the lines for what Tyler would want. Thanks very much. Hashtag military, hashtag America, hashtag armed forces, hashtag Sunday vibes as well. So, you got to hashtag things a couple times. Anyway, apparently he's really disturbed by this. Brandon Friedman, of course, pointing out, well, who doesn't make dance videos like this is, of course, Osama bin Laden and ISIS and et cetera, et cetera. And the organization that's here dancing has, of course, kicked the crap out of them every time. I don't know if that was necessarily the greatest point to be made in response to all this. I mean, after all, there's one that I want to make, and mine is the greatest response ever. But it's a good point. It's a good one. It's true, and lots of people in the comments here defending. Well, what do you care what they're doing? And they're just blowing off steam. Lots of interesting points made about comparisons to times prior and what people do on their spare time, etc. But I was just sort of wondering, it's a nice dance routine. They're all more or less synchronized, and I guess they haven't really practiced it all that hard, but they got the moves down and everything. And I don't know what separates it from, say, videos of the U.S. Army Precision Drill Team, except that those are men, and they do a lot of marching, and they have guns. I mean, they're fake guns, but they have rifles, and, they twirl them around. I mean, that's as much a dance routine as this is, except that one has guns in it, so it's tactical, so it's really cool or something. I mean, everybody knows that's military in nature. Like, one of the things that's most important to military training is to be able to twirl a gun around or pick it up by the muzzle and tap it on the ground and swing it, and everybody do it at the same time, and you make a lot of really sharp movements. And I don't know, somehow that sort of thing is that not a choreographed dance? That's line dancing for Army guys. I don't really understand why that doesn't count. But a lot of people probably disturbed by that. No. That is traditional and therefore okay. Whereas this is set to music that I don't know or understand, and therefore it's bad. Anyway, a lot of interesting comments there, including, somebody pointing out, one of the big, one of the most popular forms of entertainment in World War II, blowing off steam for troops taking a little R&R, was drag shows, which I guess, yeah, that's right, it's true. I mean, we didn't think of it that way, really, but I guess it's that. I don't know how else you would describe it. That's what's happening. And people including, pictures of the Army, or I guess the U.S. Military Academy and their cheerleading team in the football stadium, and of course all wearing the big Army uniforms, and goodness gracious, all the number of soldiers dancing around doing various things. So hard to understand. Okay. Well, anyway, I don't really know why that disturbed Tyler so much, but it shouldn't disturb you. I just thought it was kind of interesting and weird, and a good distraction for the morning. Let's see. How about some other distractions? There's a couple others that I've parked from over the weekend and from last week, which we haven't yet gotten to. So much to catch up on. Also over the weekend, of course, the very frightening hostage situation in Texas. Of course, you would have seen about this over the weekend, and it probably caught your attention, hopefully somewhere towards the end, but a lengthy hostage situation in is it Colleyville or Colleyville? Colleyville, Colleyville. Let's guess. In Texas, at Congregation Beth Israel, where somebody, I don't know, they didn't break in, as far as I understand it. They came and attended services, and apparently they were, streaming the services over the internet, as many places do now with the ongoing pandemic. And he was heard on the stream, shouting and arguing and screaming things that had nothing to do with what was going on. And then, But I guess they probably were thinking, how can we get rid of this guy? But not every place has, say, armed security who will swoop in and grab the guy and pull him out of there. Anyway, before you know it, he has taken 4 people hostage. He's in there for hours. He releases one hostage at one point. And a few hours into it, the FBI's hostage rescue team flies in from Washington, D.C., and, dispatches with the hostage taker and rescues the 3 remaining hostages unharmed. So kind of goes, tactically speaking, it goes perfectly. But, of course, not a great Shabbat at Congregation Beth Israel. Exactly the way you don't want it to go. And that, of course, has put everybody on alert. And synagogues around the country, giving renewed attention once again to safety and security, and, once again feeling like they can't open their doors to anyone who wants to come along and join in the worship. And, of course, that pretty much destroys the entire point of it. But, there are people in the world who relish the ability to do that at Jewish congregations for whatever reason. Also, equally weird and disturbing was apparently FBI statement afterwards declaring that the situation didn't really actually have anything in particular to do with the Jewish community, except for the fact that, the Jewish community was attacked and that's who he held hostage. Seems like a little odd way of approaching the problem. I think what they were trying to get at was that the hostage taker appeared to be interested in leveraging the release of a terrorism prisoner. He claimed to be this terrorist woman's brother, that she was his sister. Whether or not that's the case, I don't know. It had been established by the time I signed off on paying attention to it for the evening. I don't think it had been firmly established, but he was interested in securing her release. It's been the interest of various terrorist groups, including ISIS, to make such demands in the recent past. But how that has nothing to do with the Jewish community, I'm not really sure, except that he was wanted for anti-American terrorism. And this just seemed like a very convenient target. But I note that it wasn't an army base, and it wasn't a church, and it wasn't a McDonald's, which is also a similar, kind of an American church. But it was a Jewish synagogue. So, yeah, I don't know. That were probably not really calibrated to the situation very well. And I think they'll be doing a little after-action review of that and thinking through whether or not that was the right way to handle it. I don't think so. Anyway, let's see. Other things worth discussing. Oh, yes. You know what I wanted to tell you? I see Greg's raft of stories beginning to arrive, so that's good news. We'll have those to pay attention to in just a bit. On Friday, we spent considerable amount of time discussing that weird, horrible, and stupid Republican bill that was introduced by, what's his name? Ren Williams, from far southwestern Virginia, a freshman legislator in the General Assembly, introduced a bill that, was aimed at I guess it was supposed to be originally an anti-CRT bill, which is so necessary because, well, for one thing, no one's teaching CRT. For another thing, Glenn Youngkin on his day one set of executive orders banned the teaching of CRT, so there wouldn't be any necessity whatsoever for this legislation. Plus, of course, it was written horribly, including that ridiculous screw-up of referring to the Abraham Lincoln-Frederick Douglass debates as part of the essential teachings of the American principles that he wanted included in the curriculum. And, of course, they never debated. He was thinking of Stephen Douglas, blah, 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 etc. And we raked them over the coals pretty good. Oh, and by the way, remember that there was at the end, this is kind of important actually, at the end that Ren Williams hid a private school voucher scheme at the end. Something I think of his own concoction, that if you found out that your kids were being taught this evil CRT or something you suspected that was kind of sort of maybe almost like CRT because there were black people involved, you're entitled to relief. You can sue the school district and win all the money that they think or that you think they were going to spend on your student, and you'll get it as a voucher, and you can just take it with you and walk into private school, and they'll just take that and say, yeah, sure, you don't give us any money, it'll be fine, we'll educate your child. Well, that ain't going to happen. But what I discovered in thinking about it just a little while longer, when we read through the language of, what the hell was it? I'll open it up again. I was wondering whether that was going to work to bring us back to the bill that I wanted, and I guess it isn't. I bookmarked it in Pocket, and it saves a temporary page. All right, well, I'll have to go and look for it and bring it back to light. But Ren Williams had oh yes, now I recall what it was. Oh, and I have the sound way up on Greg's telephone sound here. I got to turn down a little bit of volume. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Good morning. Doing pretty good. A little bit late, but otherwise okay.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, it's a holiday. You were celebrating, I think, appropriately, probably.
I was celebrating waking up late.
Yeah, right. So I would. That's a great way to do it. Let me just, I'll run through this thing. I wanted to make this note.
Sure.
So I was we read through on Friday this legislation. I don't know if you heard any of the show or just happened to hear this story last week about the Virginia state legislator who introduced his anti-CRT bill on the first day of the legislative session and prescribed a curriculum that he thought Virginia students ought to be studying in social studies and history.
This was the Frederick Douglass debate?
Yes, right. So including, the Abraham Lincoln Frederick Douglass debate. Well, anyway, there were a couple of phrases in there that were familiar to me, including, I'm trying to recall exactly how this one went. But, oh yes, right. So it forbade the discussion of widely debated and currently controversial topics. And I thought that sounded familiar. And I Googled it. And you may remember the story, I guess it's a couple months now, since that story, down in Texas, when the Texas legislature passed its anti-CRT legislation, and the school administrators, where was it? I'll find the story. I put it aside for it. In South Lake School District, wherever that is, probably in the Dallas or Houston area, but I'll check out which one, where the administrators were explaining it to the teachers and came up with the formulation that, what they mean is now you will have to teach both sides of the Holocaust. You remember this one? Where they said, some of the things, we just can't teach one side of things. That's a currently widely debated and currently controversial topic. It's 80 years old, but, whatever. And so, as it turns out, that's the same phrasing. So I called up the bill that was being explained down in South Lake, Texas, House Bill 3979, and wouldn't you know it, it's almost word for word exactly what this Ren Williams fellow here in Virginia introduced just the other day. However, I will point this out, down in Texas, they had the same curriculum outlined. So he just lifted all of this information, which, by the way, when you're writing education policy, awesome idea is plagiarizing. You should absolutely plagiarize in designing your curriculum. And anyway, he plagiarized this thing, except they referred to it only as the Lincoln-Douglas debate. And he, at some point, must have said, I'm going to fill in the detail here. This is how knowledgeable I am. I'm going to add that I'm well aware that it was Frederick Douglass that was involved in this debate. And of course, Texas spelled it right with one S. That's the way Stephen Douglas spells his last name. Spelled it. He's done spelling it now. And then Frederick Douglass, he actually changed he looked up the correct spelling of Frederick Douglass's name. That's, I guess, to his credit. But What Frederick was doing in there, I have no idea. That's all on Ren Williams. That wasn't lifted verbatim from Texas. And the part about adding school vouchers, that was his own invention too. He may have stolen that language from somewhere else. But just wanted to let everybody know that. And the big national embarrassment that happened in South Lake, Texas, that turned everything around for them, and that, didn't turn everything around for them, but they had to retreat from that policy and assure everybody that wasn't true. 3 months later, Ren Williams, your brand new representative down in southwestern Virginia, said, I would like to bring that embarrassment to Virginia, and I would like to make it even more erroneous and embarrassing by adding Frederick Douglass into the picture. So, well, I don't know what the chances are that southwestern Virginia is already tired of Ren Williams, but it should happen soon. But I have a feeling they'll probably return him to the legislature. Anyway, guess what? I've taken us all the way to almost to the break, but at least you had a chance to, sleep in, grab a little breakfast, and we can, make the most of segment number 2, if you don't mind. Let's see. We're not quite at the musical segment here, but anyway, there's probably some Omicron news, probably a little pandemic news. What do you think, Greg? You got that in mind for the rest of the show today? Probably. All right. Well, he's falling asleep on us. I would too. But I don't know. Somehow I felt that was extremely important. Okay. Well, that's good news. But we're about to take off. So, yeah, I mean, it wasn't really any
I'm just glad that guy did the research.
Yeah, well,
and did all the research.
He had to do it himself.
Found out how
to
spell Frederick Douglass, and that fixed everything because he's so smart.
Yeah, right. Well, we're all in good shape. He's probably doing some research right now on virology, and I can hardly wait to see how he cures the pandemic.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Okay, this time I will let Greg Dworkin speak during this segment. It's all going to work out. Yeah,
it's fun to do it the other way around.
Yeah, right. It's relaxing. Somebody gets on a roll, you just say, let go. Go ahead.
Oh, this is what it's like to interrupt and not let somebody talk. I love it. I should do it more often.
It's fun. All right. Well, let's see. There's probably pandemic news from around the country and around the world.
I mean, first we'll acknowledge, of course, today is officially Martin Luther King Day, although his birthday was over the weekend. And yes. Republicans will co-opt it, and people like Kevin McCarthy will say stuff that everyone else looks at and say, what are you talking about?
Yeah, well, they have a dream.
But, yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of pandemic stuff going on. This is a very interesting thread by Bob Wachter, who's the UCSF internal medicine chair, I think. And he talks a little bit about how things are at the moment. He says, some folks are a bit confused about why things are likely to be much safer in a month than right now. Not why virus will peak and fall. We don't know that. But why the risk to individuals will plummet. And with that, why activities that are unsafe now will be much safer then. So it's sort of a good news, bad news thread.
Yes.
If things are a lot safer a month from now, that means things are unsafe now. People have to internalize that.
Is it just the same everywhere?
It's like the weather. If it's going to be warmer next month, it doesn't mean you go out without a coat now.
Oh, yes, right, true. I mean, that's a good way of thinking of it if you can't otherwise imagine.
Right, it's great that spring is coming, but it's January and it just snowed, okay?
Yeah, all right. And it's not the same everywhere, of course.
Of course, neither's the pandemic. There are about a dozen factors that go into a risk assessment, he says, and only one of them will fundamentally change, and that's the probability that a person near me is infectious. So let's go through the other factors that points out why that's so important.
Okay.
So will the virus I'm exposed to next month be the same as the one this month? Almost certainly.
All right.
Omicron's dominant. And it's going to be that way next month. Yeah, another variant may come along at some point.
Yeah, they'll be in France or something.
But not next week, next month.
Yeah. Yeah, all right, well, good. That's people are wondering. People are already looking ahead, wondering whether there will be another one. Although somehow people got the idea that this was the old one.
Learn and memorize it. People used to do that, a century ago, but it's not going to come up right away.
And they're not going to limit themselves to that either. The virus does not speak Greek.
Right. And also, after they run out of Greek letters, then they'll do the virus formerly known as Omicron and, that sort of thing. So they got plenty of clips.
They always have numbers, of course.
So will the virus have different properties in a month? Almost certainly not.
Good.
The current characteristics of Omicron will continue to be its method of operation, its MO, despite small mutations. Will my personal immunity to Omicron change in a month? Well, there are things that can change. If you get another vax, you'll be more immune, so do it. Get your booster. Get vax in the first place if you haven't.
Yes, please.
If you get Omicron between now and then, you'll be more immune.
To that, anyway. Yeah, okay, good.
Right? If you get sick or you start a medication like steroids that lowers your immunity or cancer drugs, you'll be less immune. But if none of those things happen, your immunity is going to be the same.
Good.
Right? Even if it changes over time, it's not going to change in a month.
All right. Great. So I'm good for February.
So next month, compared to this month, those things aren't the issues. Okay. Well, the chances of me catching Omicron from a given encounter, like going out to eat with my friends, change. Well, not really, unless the environment changes, like the restaurants installed a better filter or better ventilation. Or they open the windows in the middle of February.
Yeah, great idea.
As a matter of fact, if you lower your personal protection, like today you'd use a mask, and next month you go maskless, that'll raise your risk.
Like at school. Yeah. Okay.
So what's going on here? The virus is the same, your immunity is the same, the chances of getting infected from a given encounter is pretty much the same, unless you just go all out, I'm trying to get the virus. And yet, I, Bob Wachter, medical guru, predict that him, and most of us who are trying our best to dodge Omicron now will be more open next month. Does that make any sense? Yes.
No.
Why? Well, it's all about community prevalence. Basically, the chances that the person next to you at the restaurant, the movie, the store is infectious with COVID. If they're not, then your encounter is 100% safe. And if they are, your encounter is as risky as it is today.
Well, why didn't we just do that the whole time then?
That's why monitoring the poop data out of Boston, the MWRA, the wastewater, to see whether mRNA is in it from Omicron, is so important.
Oh, that's why.
Because as that drops, you know that less people are shedding it, so less people have it, and therefore it's safer.
Everyone. Yes. Yeah, good, right. Everybody, thank you for letting us swim around in your shed.
Now, here's a statistic for you, a little factoid. Today, near the Omicron peak, and we are sort of near peak. In fact, in some places like New York City, it's clearly dropping. The percent positive in New York, which was close to 25 a couple of weeks ago, is now less than 10.
That would be less.
And tests that they do and the chances of being positive. So, New York City is on the way to getting better, and the hospitals are getting a little better too. Today, near the Omicron peak, the odds an asymptomatic person has COVID is about 10% in most of the United States.
All right.
Right? At 10% prevalence, when you enter a room with 20 people, there's an 88% chance that one of them has COVID. Without a mask, and you're going to get infected.
Yeah, that's why you're supposed to wear them.
Well, it's hard to wear a mask when you eat.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, that's why you should stop eating. And that would probably solve the poop problem, too, quite honestly.
Exactly. In a month, if cases fall to prior non-surge numbers, the prevalence among asymptomatic people may be more like 0.2%, which is a big difference from 10%. Yeah. Even in less vaxxed regions, which will have more people whose immunity came from infection, they should still get vaxxed for better and longer protection, but, they still have some degree. So 0.2% means the odds of an asymptomatic person having COVID is 1 in 500. So that room of 20 people, now there's a 4% chance instead of an 88% chance, and that's why you're safer.
Okay.
Okay, so there's other things, too. More people vaccinated, tests will be more abundant, some of the medications like Paxlovid, oral pill, from Pfizer, easier time getting it. So there's a lot of things that go into the mix that change things on the margin, but the main and single thing that matters most is your community prevalence.
Right.
And that's why, as a very crude and it didn't work very well measure, schools and governors at the very beginning were saying, well, I'll make my decisions as to whether or not to give you orders to wear a mask indoors or close schools based on community prevalence. The problem with that is it's too slow. By the time you find out, it's too late. Okay? So the better way to do it, and there was a recent paper on this, is, for example, for schools to simply test kids. I know some schools in Virginia do.
Well, schools and testing don't exactly go together.
Well, they do testing on occasion.
What? Okay. Fine.
Oh, I know. You solve the problem by simply standardizing them. Then you could do standardized tests. Everybody's okay with that.
Yeah, right. Fill in here. Do you have COVID? Yes, no.
Well, that's standard.
Yeah.
Right? But the point is that if you screen in schools with tests, you have a much better idea of if your percent positive starts to go up, what you need to do and whether or not you need to act. You'll know a lot faster than waiting for the governor to tell you what to do.
Yeah. But we didn't have that.
We didn't have that then, but as testing becomes more common now, and as Biden gets his 1 billion tests online, and today's Monday, as of Wednesday, people can go to a website and actually request tests to have at home.
Yeah,
they're making more. They're easier to get. They're not easy yet, but they're still easier to get. You can still get them on Amazon. It's about 2-week lag time, so plan ahead.
Yeah.
But the point is, if you have these tests, and whether you do them at home or whether the school does them, and if you do them at home and you're positive, you're supposed to report to the school, not just send your kid, oh, well, I just wanted to know, but go anyway. That's not the idea.
I passed the test, everybody.
Yeah. So, that's, as we say on tests, that's cheating. So the idea is that if you test and use that as a screen, you're in much better shape. So, there's ways to manage this, which is not the same thing as the commonly used word that doesn't mean what you think it means, endemic. Because people use endemic as, oh, it's harmless now, so I don't have to worry about it. That's not what endemic means.
They kind of do. Yeah, all right.
Right? If, for example, you are an area that constantly has malaria, smallpox, polio, but it's at the same level all the time, it's endemic and unsafe.
Okay.
Reading reports, I've never been there. I'm not Novak Djokovic, so I've never traveled. But, reading reports of Australia, it seems like the entire continent is dangerous at all times.
For many reasons, sure.
There's just wonderful, pieces you can pick up of 100 ways Australia will kill you. If it's not the scorpions, it's the poisonous snakes, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But, just because something is the same level all the time doesn't mean that it's perfectly safe. So what's happening with Omicron is that things look to improve in a month or so, and therefore there's no reason to just take your mask off now and say, okay, it's over. And at the same time, asking somebody to wear their mask for a couple of weeks until we get past this peak is not the same thing as lockdown forever.
Right.
I hate that phrase because we haven't locked down in a year and a half.
Yeah, it's been some time. If Saturday Night Live is happening in their studio, you're not locked down. That's
pretty
the way
much.
to measure it.
Right? If the Australia Open is happening.
Yeah, right.
They're not locking down. What they're doing is being cautious and asking for reasonable things like you need to get vaccinated. I read this morning that the French Open may be closed to Novak Djokovic because he's not vaccinated. And by the way,
France is having a hard
he
time.
also gave an interview about a year ago talking about all sorts of homeopathic things like the water picks up your emotions, and this is important. Water's alive, and what I'm trying to say is the guy's an anti-science guy from way back, so that should be no surprise. I would be very surprised if he actually decided to get vaccinated. It'd be great.
Yeah. Surprise
but
us all.
That's not how it works, And so when you are completely self-centered, it's one of the things that makes you very good at what you do when it's an individual sport.
Yeah.
And
sure
so, you can be driven and be a team player. Not my favorite, but Tom Brady's like that.
Okay.
It's all about the team.
Right.
Or you can be completely driven and be an individual. I don't care about anybody else, guy like Djokovic, which is why his fellow tennis pros aren't real keen on him.
Yes. Well, that probably happens a lot in tennis. There's a lot of egos in the sport, and I think probably because it is mostly an individual thing, and it's kind of the mindset you have to have.
Well, it is the mindset, but I would remind you that some great players, like Serena Williams, play doubles.
True. Yes.
Different mindset.
There are definitely
it's not just all about me. It's all about
good
somebody else too.
examples out there. But yeah, tennis is a thing that brings it out in people for whatever reason. And but you can be singularly focused and also just they all leave their health decisions up to others as it is anyway. They're hiring various nutritionists and trainers and professionals and just do what they say. So
you can't let the players off the hook and the sport off the hook.
No,
by saying that, okay, well, Djokovic is who he is.
Oh, well, I can.
Because Australia could have said, no vax, no in.
Yeah.
Period.
Right.
No discussion. These are the rules. You don't get special rules because you happen to be one of the greatest players of all time, if not the greatest player of all time.
Right. Well, go to the Hall of Fame instead of coming here.
Right.
Get out of here, man. I recognize it. That is who he is, and he's also not going to.
That's why it's so important that the French Open says, us too.
Yes.
We're not having this. We're not going to do this in advance. Now, they haven't decided. They're talking about it. But the point is the whole sport, as a sport.
Yeah, should be doing that. President Basketball did it. You should do it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, good idea. I'm glad. And, and I thought there are really a lot of good smart tennis players out there that know how to handle the media. They are always in front of it on their own. So good commentary being given by the other players too. Look, I wish he was here, but if he was vaccinated, I would be great. But he's not, and so we'll have a great tournament anyway, and it's going to be fantastic, and you'll see great tennis. I mean, sometimes guys lose, and you don't leave the tournament, right? So today he lost. This is essentially what happened.
Right.
Pretend it happened that way, and he might lose the French Open too.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah. All right. Well, good. Lots of. I was kind of astonished. The only thing that really interested me about the whole situation was how many conservatives were suddenly for illegal immigration. I really love that. The legal requirement to enter Australia is X. He has done not X. That makes him an illegal at the border. And what do you want to let him in for? I thought you hated that.
Because he's a white guy.
Yeah. Right. But Also, by the way, when did you all decide Serbians were white guys? But okay. Yeah, I guess so. All right. Well, that really excited them.
Speaking of corporate, responsibility here, one can also look to, for example, Joe Rogan.
Sure, why not?
Joe Rogan has hundreds of millions of monthly downloads, says this particular piece, Tom McKay and Gizmodo. That makes him one of the biggest vehicles for rhetoric that's at the very least sympathetic to and sometimes actively promoting the anti-vax movement. It's in the roundup today, but let me give you the article.
All right.
And his distributor, Spotify, is obviously willing to look the other way to protect their exclusive $100 million deal, even if that means letting him promote wild conspiracy theories.
Yeah, that's a little bit of an Australian Open situation itself.
So, Rogan's a problem, but he's always been a problem. The bigger problem is Spotify letting him.
Yeah.
So Rogan doesn't get off the hook just by being, Rogan.
He shouldn't.
His corporate owners, in this particular case, have already done other things. When they moved his broadcast and podcast to Spotify, he had some iffy ones with some white supremacists. They didn't move over. They didn't port over to the new site. And he said he was okay with it. He didn't care.
Okay. So
they don't have to let every single one of his, podcasts go,
Yeah.
they can and have censored some things, but not other things. And they've decided that, 835 some thousand deaths in the U.S., that doesn't count. That's nothing.
No.
That's not worth, and so what if there's another 100,000 more because of things he says on our network?
Yeah, or that Justice Alito says in striking down various mandates. We can blame it on a lot of people here.
Well, that one you can't blame on Spotify.
Right. No, I don't think so, unless they recorded it and are playing it, which is possible. But still, it's really chiefly with the justices. But yeah, a lot of this seems to be like the hottest thing in conservative and corporate circles is just treating everything as though it were a high school prank, whether it's insurrection against the United States government, anti-vax material on podcasts, or...
Yeah, well, since you went that direction, so I got this one. David and I are playing Freeform today. So Adam Serwer had a very good article in The Atlantic. I don't know if you saw. The culture war has warped the Supreme Court's judgment.
No, I'll see it next month. Yes.
Yesterday's decision hinges on a new and alarming embrace of the right-wing crusade against vaccination.
Okay.
Okay. If you read the legal language for Occupational Safety and Health Act, which authorizes the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, notice that I've used health twice.
Yes,
in that
like
sense.
parents in Yunkin. Yeah.
To act in an emergency capacity when workers face grave danger from exposure to substances or agents determined to be toxic or physically harmful or from new hazards. That's what the statute says.
Yeah. This is one, a new hazard.
And when such emergency standard is necessary to protect employees from such danger. You might think that the Biden administration's vaccine mandates stood a good chance of surviving the Supreme Court's review, but if you watch Fox News at all over the past year, you'd have guessed it was doomed.
And you'd guess right, because you were pretty
so
wrong.
So they blocked it. And the unsigned opinion reads, and this is one of the dumbest things I've ever seen, COVID-19 can and does spread at home in schools during sporting events and everywhere else. That kind of universal risk is no different from the day-to-day dangers that all face from crime, air pollution, or any number of communicable diseases. So because you can catch it elsewhere, we don't have to make it any safer to catch by packing you in. Talk about meatpacking plants. We'll pack all the people together.
Right.
And increase the risk of getting it, and that's not our problem. That's your problem.
Yeah, it is rather unbelievable. I mean,
now, this is laughable logic, Adam Serwer says. OSHA regulates many, many hazards that are also present outside the workplace.
Right.
You can die in a fire in your apartment. That's not a reason against regulating fire hazards at factories. The mandate applied to firms whose employees have to work indoors because that's how the virus spreads. And moreover, unlike attending a sporting event as a spectator, people have to go to work unless they're lucky enough to be a Supreme Court justice, in which case you can work remotely.
Yeah, right. That's true. But the ones who choose to work remotely are usually pretty sensitive to this stuff.
Right. So Gorsuch portrays vaccination as, quote, a medical procedure that affects people's lives outside the workplace. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. And Alito insisted those cases are not about the efficacy or importance of the vaccine, while describing the vaccine or test requirement as forcing healthcare workers to undergo a medical procedure they do not want and cannot undo.
Okay.
These are melodramatic and overwrought ways to describe vaccination, which involves getting a shot and moving on with your life.
Pretty much.
Infants react to getting vaccinated with greater dignity and more composure. But this is of a piece with the cultural and political shift that's taken place over the past year, in which prominent conservative figures and media outlets have chosen to undermine the federal government's public health response by attacking vaccines as dangerous and portraying vaccine mandates as tyrannical.
Yes.
And this you can see day to day on Fox News. And so he goes through their various responses. Conservatives were often vocally pro-vaccination in the past when anti-vaccine sentiment was vaguely associated with people the comedian Jon Stewart once mocked as science-denying affluent California liberals. With affluent California liberals as a symbol, conservative culture war instincts trended in a more constructive direction. A 2015 measles outbreak at Disneyland illustrated the importance of mass vaccination to obtain herd immunity and suppress disease, and many conservatives at the time made that point. Guess who had this quote? If you think about the childhood illnesses that once permanently debilitated people like my grandfather who contracted childhood polio, and you think today that measles, rubella, polio have been eradicated, much of the world, why would we go backwards?
Yeah, why would we? We would.
Senator Ted Cruz said in 2015.
Well, that is surprising.
Isn't it? When you read what he has to say?
Right.
So, as Justice Elena Kagan put during the oral argument, I don't know about that kind of doctrine in the OSH Act or any place else in administrative law, because you can say it's unsafe or ineffective, that somebody would prefer not to be regulated. The agency loses its power.
Yeah.
But that, unfortunately, goes to the heart of the matter. The text of the OSH Act is so clear that conservative justices had to get philosophical. They couldn't get textual. Because it says right there what it's about.
Yeah.
Health is in OSHA. It's in the name.
It's the H.
Of the agency.
Yeah.
Because what they know is good Fox News watching conservatives is they don't like it.
Yeah.
And that, therefore, you have to find some reason to not keep it.
Yeah. Well, that happens a lot with conservatives. They forget where things come from and what they supported in the past, or, they demonize certain words and then realize actually they're quite central to their own regulation schemes. It's very odd, and they had to read it. I don't know what I guess we're inventing new words like alegalistically. It was impossible to read the act and not see the authorization. So they had to come up with something else, which was which they didn't really have to. They could just say what we say goes, but they're just not really at that point yet. That'll come when I guess something more complicated, and they'll just say, "Well, we just want this."
Oliver Willis has made this point, and so Adam Serwer's basic point of this whole piece here is unfortunately true, and that is you can't ignore Fox News. It used to be that when Trump was president, you had to watch Fox News to find out what policy was. Right. And unfortunately, he points out, now you have to watch Fox News to figure out what the hell the Supreme Court's going to do, because it's certainly not based on the Constitution.
Yeah, if you look there, you'll guess that they'll conclude something else. But if you watch the memes, 6 or so of them are likely to cite them in their opinions. So you got to know what's going on, and you'll be lost if you just read the law. That's crazy.
Yeah, especially be lost if you expect them to uphold the law based on the law.
Yeah. And that was a huge thing, and it's a great demonstration of that principle, this particular case. How many pundits and experts said, well, I've read, if you read the law, I know they want to strike it down, but they really just can't. The law is just too solid and stands completely athwart their purposes here. And but people like Armando have been saying, look, for years, if they want to get to this conclusion, they will. If the opinion reads terribly or looks stupid, that doesn't really bother these guys. So, they'll get where they want to go. And lo and behold, all the experts were wrong. Pre-wrong, as we like to say on the show. You didn't know you were wrong about the law until 6 justices decided you were. We can't tell you what the reasons are because there aren't any. You're just wrong.
Well, I'll tell you as a layperson, though, what I thought was interesting is if you just step back and look at 50,000 feet, I had an idea what was going on because basically the legal analysts, Ian Milthauser and the like, basically said, look, the part about it that says that they could regulate healthcare workers because the federal government pays for a lot of it through Medicare and Medicaid, that's going to stand. But the OSHA one is in trouble. And, in fact, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. We got, some of our own, I guess what we would call our in-house experts, who are pretty well aware that they are outcome-driven.
Yeah.
They understand where that was going. But, this is essentially, people may remember the discussions of the Affordable Care Act and the arguments and when Scalia was convinced that about the broccoli mandate or the Cornhusker kickback, things that were essentially things that arose out of Fox News memes but didn't have any reality in the text, and nonetheless made it into, if not always into written opinions, into the oral argument questioning by Supreme Court justices. There's a real problem. There's like brain rot among the Supreme Court. They actually get their talking points for oral arguments from Fox. And it doesn't matter that the arguments being made on Fox are ridiculous and baseless. They were on TV. We actually just have justices watching TV and parroting stuff back.
I think that what the formal term for this is legalistic argle-bargle.
Yeah, well, we can hang that on it for sure. Well, maybe fewer of them will be getting their news from OAN if they have the right cable or satellite provider.
Apparently you're not going to be able to watch OAN so easily anymore.
Right, it's being kicked off some of the
DirecTV is
networks.
throwing them off.
Yeah, so that's
and that's their main outlet,
news.
by the way.
Yeah, I don't know who else carries them, but yeah, that's true. That was kind of good news. Although I did see it pointed out over the weekend that other news organizations reporting the news that OAN was being kicked off still can't bring themselves to say, "Oh, it's a far right propaganda network that's being kicked off." They just say, "Oh, it's a popular news network." We don't know why it's happening. I mean, we don't. It's probably economic more than political, but okay.
Well, this goes back to the Brett Kavanaugh confirmation.
Oh.
Because I think at the time it opened up people's eyes to the fact that what we're doing here, we are talking about in a way that's, different than Sandra Day O'Connor, who was a politician.
Yes.
But we're essentially confirming a political operative.
Yeah.
Who was extremely partisan in his day-to-day life prior to being in the justice field,
yes.
being a judge.
Right.
And to expect him somehow or other, again, we've used this quote in other circumstances, but you can't take a tree fungus and sort of convince them into being a racehorse, because at the end of the day, they're still a tree fungus.
Yes, I guess so.
So Kavanaugh and the others on the Supreme Court who are incredibly, driven by their agenda, they're not going to change. They'll just look for laws to, make it why they are. That's not the way the law is supposed to work. There's plenty of conservative jurists who are not like that. But the guys we have on the Supreme Court, they are.
Well, they were brought up that way, yeah, and didn't learn any other methods. All right, well, we'll return in just a minute, and you're welcome to stay or take off.
At least you will.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg, yes, taking full advantage of the day, the snow day off. And he'll be back on Wednesday. There's plenty we can save until then, and lots to comb through that he left behind as well. Let's see, some of the other directions that I wanted to go along with. I will say, yeah, I'm fascinated by, and maybe one day, maybe offline, I'll read through the piece he left behind, because it really is, I think, an analog or an analogy to be made to the larger, wider political situation. The idea of the Spotify will never do anything about Joe Rogan piece that he brought us from Gizmodo, alongside the tennis controversy thing, which in fact they eventually did do something about Djokovic. And but yeah, I spent a lot of time thinking about it over the weekend about the ye old insurrection and how little officialdom at the moment seems to be doing about it, despite the fact that Marcy Wheeler keeps trying to convince us that lots is happening in the background, and I really hope that that's true. And, one of the problems with this stuff is that, the Justice Department, when they're working properly, their lips are generally pretty tightly sealed. So, yeah, it's difficult to tell what they're up to. There's lots of breadcrumbs around, but there's also lots of disappointment to go around. I will say that, how much excitement was there over the possibility that there could be real, lasting, long-term impacts for Dick Cheney and Scooter Libby back in the day, just to stick with Marcy's favorite topics. And that, what's his name? Fitzpatrick. Was that right? Or was it Patrick Fitzgerald? I can't remember anymore. Who the hell are we talking about when we talked about, do you remember? Fitzmas. Everybody was sure that the hammer was going to come down, and the hammer never really came down. just didn't really work out the way we thought it would. And golly gee, what a surprise for everyone. What? Anyway, this is Patrick Fitzgerald. We got it right. Okay, I'm trying to remember. Wasn't he extremely tall too? Just like James Comey. I don't know what it was. We could have. Those guys were better suited for the basketball court than the courtroom, I suppose. At least in terms of the results we all wanted to see. Anyway, I just think it's all part of a very interesting general trend, which I think we're all used to. I mean, and we all condemn it and it makes us sick, but just essentially, it's been addressed in a number of ways. Even the now disgraced John Edwards had the two Americas idea. And, similarly, two systems of justice. There's things that little people get in trouble for and stuff that the rest of us get in trouble for. Anyway, let's see. I think I'll skip off of. It's too bad that I wasn't able to call up all of the legislation that we looked at last week. Although I wonder whether the link probably wouldn't work there. I wonder if I can find. Where can I find? Maybe this is the link I need. General Assembly members and their legislation. See if we can look at it that way. Oh, look at this. This is the old listing. Oh, no, there he is. Ren Williams. And, okay, that brings up his stuff. You have chief patron of various pieces of legislation. Let's see. Where's the one? I don't know what he entitled his thing. Oh, maybe this is it here. Public elementary and secondary schools student citizenship stuff. Or is this the one? Yeah, I think so. All right. I guess just by way of illustrating the similarities between the two, because I have the Texas bill up now. But where was it? Right up at the top here. As used in this section, divisive concept means that the concept that one race, religion, ethnicity, or sex is inherently superior to another race, religion, ethnicity, or sex. You remember that whole thing? Switching over to the Texas legislation, HB 3979. It's not direct section for section. He moves some things around. The definitions are moved to the top, but the same definitions are used in a different section. Here we are, section 6 of the Texas bill. I'm just scrolling up to see if there's any other numbers and whatnot before this. But no teacher, administrator, or other employee in any state agency, school district, campus, open enrollment, charter school, or school administration shall require, although it is a typo here, it does say shall require, so I'm not sure what that means, or make part of a course the following concepts. Ready? 1, that one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. An individual, by virtue of his or her race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. Or 3, an individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely or partly because of his or her race or sex. 4, members of one race or sex cannot and should not attempt to treat others without respect to race or sex. 5, an individual's moral character is necessarily determined by his or her race or sex. You got that, so that's the direction that they're going in. And the Virginia bill, again, the divisive concepts that can't be taught. Concepts that one race, religion, ethnicity, or sex is inherently superior. An individual, by virtue of the individual's race, religion, ethnicity, or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. An individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment or partly, solely or partly because of the individual's race, religion, ethnicity, or sex. Members of one cannot and should not attempt to treat others without respect to race, religion, ethnicity, or sex. It's pretty much identical. There's, moving down the list in the Virginia bill here, the founding documents of the United States, including the Declaration of Independence, the United States Constitution, the Federalist Papers, including essays 10 and 51, excerpts from Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America, and, of course, the famous first debate between Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, and the writings of the founding fathers of the United States are part of the required curriculum framework as outlined in the Virginia bill. Now in Texas, I'm going to have to scroll back to the top here and go looking for it. Here we are, Section 3. What will have to be part of the Texas curriculum? The founding documents of the United States, including the Declaration of Independence, the United States Constitution, the Federalist Papers, including but not limited to Essays 10 and 51, excerpts from Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America, the first just plain old Lincoln-Douglas debate, and the writings of the founding fathers of the United States. In other words, basically verbatim, except for the fact that he went and added Frederick and a second S to Douglas. By the way, let's see, is the very next paragraph also equally similar? I should take a look. Let's see, we just read the one about the founding documents. Oh, right. Well, okay, now he switches some things around in the order. From the Virginia bill, no public school teacher or other instructional staff member shall be required to discuss any current event or widely debated and currently controversial issue of public policy or social affairs. Any such employee who chooses to discuss any such event or issue in the scope of his instructional duties shall, to the best of his ability, strive to explore such issues from diverse and contending perspectives without giving deference to any one perspective. Now back to the stupid Texas bill that started it all, that embarrassed the state by instructing their teachers that they had to teach both sides of the Holocaust, right? That one reads, no teacher shall be compelled by a policy of any state agency, school district, campus, open enrollment, charter school, or school administration to, they have their own language to introduce that section, discuss current events or widely debated or currently controversial issues of public policy or social affairs. Teachers who choose to discuss current events, right, or widely debated and currently controversial issues of public policy or social affairs shall, to the best of their ability, strive to explore such issues from diverse and contending perspectives without giving deference to any one perspective. Pretty much the same thing. And so it goes all throughout the bill. It's not, neither of them are particularly long, and you will find that all of the same stupid, stilted language from the Texas bill has been carried forward into the Virginia bill. So very poor job there by Ren Williams in covering his tracks. And maybe it was never intended that he cover his tracks. Maybe it was an ALEC bill to begin with, and that's why it appears to be largely the same in Texas and Virginia. I would imagine that if you searched around in, I don't know if you can, find all this stuff directly from Google, whether it dives down into the legislative text of the various systems, online systems of the 50 states. But I would guess that you will probably find bills like this with the same language lifted from a central model in several states. I'm going to guess 24 at this point probably have such bills filed. And they were probably filed on day one, not because these guys were so anxious to get to work and get started on considering such bills immediately, as the fact that it was written for them elsewhere, and all they had to do was put their name on it up at the top, and it would look like they were sponsoring legislation from the get-go. I'm a real go-getter. I'm a brand new member. This is my first term, and I have 6 or 7 bills to offer. In fact, when I looked up by name, Ren Williams, you might wonder, well, what else has he been working on? Again, this is his first term, and he has been in office now since Wednesday. And I looked up what bills has Ren Williams been, as they say in the Virginia legislature, been the chief patron of. Not that he's co-sponsoring other people's bills, but something, chief patron, he's introduced. Well, he's been a busy little bee, hasn't he? He has no legislative experience prior to this. But let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. There are 13 bills, 13 pieces of legislation, resolutions, some of them, that he has already introduced in his Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday 5, 6 days in office. Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, 3 of them being holidays, essentially. There's no work being done. But he has, I already forget the number, over 10 bills. I'll count again. It should be numbered here. 1, 2, 3, what did I say? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Lucky number 13. He has been the chief patron of HB 775, Religious Freedom, applicability of certain executive orders, which of course hadn't been issued yet, interestingly enough, but maybe they were previous administration's executive orders. HB 776, abortion, born alive human infant, treatment and care and penalty. What a surprise that he's come with. Religious freedom, abortion, then relocation of monuments and memorials. Also, elections, photo identification required, time for in-person absentee. They're going to be limiting that as well. Also, voter registration. Registration is permitted up to and including the day of election. I don't know whether that's to rescind that or allow that. That's interesting. It surprises me that he'd be interested in doing that. Well, let's see what the summary says. Repeals repeals a provision that would permit any person who is qualified to register to vote in person up to and including the day of election, notwithstanding any deadline for the close of registration periods. The repeal will limit the persons who are entitled to register to vote after the close of registration records to any member of the Uniformed Services of the United States on active duty, any person residing temporarily outside the United States, and the spouse or dependent residing with someone listed in 1 or 2. So expats and military. He still says you can register day of. What else is he screwing around with? Let's see. Public elementary and secondary schools. That's the one we read. Non-suits. Appeals from judgment of a general district court. That's kind of obscure. Alec must have handed him that one. Let's see. Some bail issues. Acquisition and use of military property by law enforcement agencies. Wants to bring that back. Virginia Code Commission. Work group to review public notices required to be published. And payment of small amounts to certain persons without involvement of fiduciary threshold. Interesting. And then commending Terry Tilley. So some local thing that he might actually have come up with on his own. One of the 13 bills might be, something that was locally generated and that he actually did on his own. Who is it? Terry Tilley, longtime town manager of the town of Stewart, which I think is his hometown. Ren Williams. He's retiring and being recognized by this, what he wants is to have the state legislature waste time recognize. Very good. I'm glad you were the town clerk for a long time. Good job. Anyway, 13 bills from somebody with no legislative experience on day one. Probably a pretty good indication that you will find the same language in other states. You might, if you're inclined, even dig around to see whether anybody copied off of him and brought it to the hopper with Frederick Douglass's name in it. I doubt it. I think that was his own doing. And pretty remarkable. Anyway, parents like him just want to have a say in kids' education, damn it. And that includes unmasking them. So anyway, it's going to be quite a show here in Virginia. I guess the local perspective I haven't added yet, but I'll add now is, so the purported rescission of the mask mandates is in an order signed by Governor Youngkin that says that the effective date of his order is January 24th. That's next Monday. That will make zero difference, of course. And I think it's designed, he says, of course, it's designed to give school systems a week to get ready for how to deal with this thing. But it's just going to cause chaos for the rest of this week. There's no chance in the world that certainly any of the parents and students that would support such a rescission of the mask mandate are going to recognize. They're not going to read down to the bottom that says it's effective on the 24th. They're going to show up at school tomorrow and insist that they don't have to work or they don't have to comply with the mask mandates. and that nobody else does either. And they might even be of the opinion that they are now deputized to remove the masks of their peers because they wouldn't have heard the great news that they no longer have to wear the masks. And they will, of course, regard it as outlawing masks and deputizing them to pull the masks off of other people's faces. There's going to be fights in the hallways starting tomorrow. And like I said, by midweek, you're going to have, to lay it at the feet of people who don't necessarily deserve it. You might find the school bullies, let's say, or perhaps popular quarterbacks on the football team deciding that it's okay to pull the masks off of geeks and nerds and kids who are taking advanced placement classes, because what are they going to do about it? And besides, the governor's on my side. Not until the 24th, of course, but I doubt that's going to register with them. So we'll see. I will say this. Word is, I don't know how straight the word is, but the word is that at least in my kids' school, the masking compliance is pretty high. And well before this executive order, there have been, kids who thought it would be funny to pull the mask off of other kids passing one another in the hall. And apparently the word is that the people who have reached out and put their hands on others and taken the mask off somebody else have been, in high school parlance, beaten up for it. And, well, you shouldn't be putting your hands on anybody for any reason. But it hasn't gone well. So, to date, anyway. But I don't know that that's going to be the case everywhere. I think pretty soon you're going to find kids doing that and parents defending the kids' actions, saying, masks don't work, and the governor said this was okay. And it'll all be a silly misunderstanding. Golly. Anyway, let's see. We got a couple other items in our own hopper here to take a look at. Let's jump back over to, I forgot that now the way Pocket works, once you click on something, a lot of the things are formatted such that it won't let you go directly back to Pocket. It just jumps you out to a new window. Anyway, let's see. A few other things that I wanted to share with you that seem like they might be of interest. This piece from NPR over the weekend, I don't know whether it was Friday after the show or during the actual weekend, but this was news I thought we would add to the mix. Trump officials interfered with the 2020 census beyond cutting it short. Emails show. What about their emails? Well, now we have some of them. And former President Donald Trump's administration, it turns out, alarmed career civil servants at the Census Bureau by not only ending the 2020 national head count early, but also pressuring them to alter plans for protecting people's privacy and producing accurate data. A newly released email shows link here to the Brennan Center's report on this email, but let's stick with NPR for the summary. Trump's political appointees at the Commerce Department, which oversees the Bureau, demonstrated an unusually high level of engagement in technical matters, which is unprecedented relative to previous censuses, according to a September 2020 email that Ron Jarman, the Bureau's deputy director, sent to two other top civil servants. At the time, the administration was faced with the reality that if Trump lost the November election, he could also lose a chance to change the census numbers used to redistribute political representation. The window of opportunity was closing for his administration to attempt to radically reshape the futures of the U.S. House of Representatives and the Electoral College. Which, what's the difference? You can just forge the certificates anyway, so who cares? Despite the 14th Amendment's requirement to include the whole number of persons in each state, Trump wanted to exclude unauthorized immigrants from the census counts used to reallocate each state's share of congressional seats and electoral votes. While the former president's unprecedented push did not reach its ultimate goal, it wreaked havoc at the federal government's largest statistical agency, which was also contending with the coronavirus pandemic, upending most of its plans for the once-a-decade tally. The delays stemming from COVID-19 forced the Bureau to conclude that it could no longer meet the legal reporting deadline for the first set of results and needed more time. The administration's last-minute decision to cut the counting short sparked public outcries, including a federal lawsuit that reached the U.S. Supreme Court, but its interference in other areas related to the 2020 census largely flew under most radars. Woof. The newly released email, first reported by the New York Times and obtained by the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University Law School through an ongoing public records lawsuit, details the wide scope of its attempts to buck the Bureau's experts and tamper with the count. According to the document, the agency's career civil servants saw when to end counting as a policy decision that political leadership should make, but the methodologies and procedures for filling in data gaps, reviewing the counts for errors, and protecting the confidentiality of people's information should strictly stay in the lane of civil servants at an independent statistical agency, the email says. Trump officials, including Wilbur Ross, who served as Commerce Secretary, however, expressed interest, quote-unquote, expressed interest in many technical areas, including exactly how the Bureau could produce a state-by-state count of unauthorized immigrants and citizenship data that could have politically benefited Republicans when voting districts are redrawn. The email suggests that the Bureau's civil servants were planning to discuss their concerns with Ross through the end of 2020, but he fell asleep. The Bureau's Public Information Office did not immediately respond to NPR's questions about whether those discussions took place. They didn't bother to deny them. Other internal government documents the Brennan Center released Saturday showed that Bureau officials were wary of carrying out Trump's July 2020 presidential memorandum. Before President Biden reversed the directive last year, it called for information that would allow the president to leave out the number of immigrants living in the U.S. without authorization from the congressional apportionment count, or without authorization from the congressional appointment count. There we go. Okay. According to an August 2020 email by Jarman, the Bureau's highest-ranking civil servant, the agency had received months before the memorandum asks for the information related to a federal lawsuit focused on the same topic. Like Trump, the challengers in the lawsuit, the state of Alabama, and Republican Representative Mo Brooks, who's always in trouble for this stuff, they wanted undocumented immigrants excluded from the numbers used to reallocate House seats and electoral votes. The Bureau, however, was consistently pessimistic on the feasibility of removing undocumented people from the apportionment count. Jarman warned in the email to two Trump appointees, then Director Stephen Dillingham, who ultimately resigned following whistleblower complaints, and Nathaniel Cogley, who served in the newly created controversial role of Deputy Director for Policy. By the way, I slightly changed the text of the email in reading it, just so you're aware that they do this stuff internally. Jarman uses the term for undocumented people is undocs, just undocs. I don't know whether we should feel weird or uneasy about that, but that's a term that I guess they use internally. And I wonder whether they would rather people not know that. I mean, it's not inherently wrong, but anyway, just sort of weird. Still, civil servants attempted to be transparent about how they tried to create the data ordered by the former administration. We recommend that we do a Federal Register notice on the methodology because transparency requires that the American public understand how we derive the counts of unauthorized immigrants and have the opportunity to comment on that methodology, said a slide titled Communications Strategy Decision for an August 2020 briefing. No such notice appeared in the federal government's official journal of record. So that must have gone down the tubes. In response to the newly disclosed documents, Arturo Vargas, a longtime census advocate and CEO of the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials Educational Fund, said in a statement that the efforts of the Bureau's career professionals to resist Trump officials' pressure and protect the integrity of the census were nothing short of heroic. On Tuesday, the Biden administration's Scientific Integrity Task Force, which includes Jarman, issued a report warning that the Bureau and other federal statistical agencies must protect against interference in their efforts to create and release data that provides a common set of facts to inform policymakers, researchers, and the public. So a good policy idea. Anyway, we'll see whether, I'm sure it'll become easier to apply under the Biden administration, despite the fact that many pundits and many others love comparing the two administrations and saying that there's not much difference between the two of them. All right, another paragraph or two before we close out. The report presented the Trump administration's decision to end the 2020 census counting early as a case study, noting that the Bureau's internal watchdog, the Commerce Department Inspector General's office, concluded that the rushed schedule put the quality of the results at risk. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, let's see. Trying to find some details on other stories I wanted to turn to, but not certain whether I'm going to be able to come up with it. But note to self, anyway, I'll go around and see if I can collect it. So there was one last line from that NPR piece that I neglected to include. So as we probably would have guessed, the civil servants, of course, pushing the view that the rushed schedule and unusual inquiries at the Census Bureau put the quality of the results at risk. However, the one important thing we didn't get to include before the break, to date, the report added, no individuals have been held accountable for these allegations. So, yes, another story very much in keeping with the lack of accountability all around. Let's see. Speaking of that, I guess we could go in a slightly different direction from what I had planned, but why not read this piece from Dan Frumkin? It seems like a good segue. Now, the year accountability died, since we're talking about how many times there's been no accountability for anything. He writes this for his January 4th edition of Press Watch, his own private newsletter, as it were, but making the rounds again, despite the fact that it is about 2 weeks old at this point, but with the notation on Twitter that it's really good and you should read it. And so why don't we do that? Because it makes sense to follow up on, again, lack of any accountability for one of several very important background stories and some very important foreground stories as well. And that's the focus of this piece, I think. Holding the powerful accountable is the noblest and most essential goal of the journalistic profession. But 2021 may go down in history as the year that our major newsrooms shamefully gave up on it. Before Trump, if you had asked Americans what was the one thing that could disqualify a party from future participation in democratic politics, they might well have said trying to steal a presidential election. Or for that matter, mounting an insurrection against the government of the United States. I think either one probably would have qualified. But the Trump era has made you expand your goals. I always say things like blowing up the moon or dynamiting the Great Pyramids, something like that. That would probably, I don't know, maybe the Great Pyramids wouldn't disturb everybody so much here in the United States. But around the world, generally speaking, things that you could never get away with. This is definitely out of bounds. By the way, even before I go any further with this, again, the concept here is asking what would make America in general disqualify a party from future participation in democratic politics. And, that's not even a question most people have ever contemplated. Nothing. It can't. They would never do such a thing. Yeah. Well, they are doing such things. But I think over the weekend, let's see. I'll see if I can scroll back and find it so that we can properly credit it. But I think it might have been our good friend of the show, Grudging One, who tweeted out, by the way, if there were an NBA team, or if you prefer an NFL team, and there's more evidence that this is happening in NFL and Major League Baseball than in the NBA, but if you found out that pick your favorite sport, that one of the professional sports teams in this organization, hockey, baseball, football, basketball, what have you, was threatening refs and having the players or people representing the players call the referees at home and threaten their families or threaten to kill them or seeking to insist that they be able to install their own refs at the games, right? We would never be thinking about, that's just sports. That's just the way things are done. They're just looking for every advantage they get. We'd be talking about, when is this team going to be banned from the league? But when it's an election, not so much. They're just trying. This stuff we excuse for whatever weird reason. And in politics, we tend to excuse it because we don't know what the hell else to do. But in sports, we're determined that there be fairness in the competition. And we have this weird, almost fetish about this, we would never let anybody get away with this sort of thing in sports, but in politics, all right. I'm just scrolling to see if I can find it, but it's buried under my yelling about, a lot of my yelling about Glenn Youngkin and his stupid mask mandate thing. All right. Well, at any rate, we will, I'm sure, find it in due time and be able to share it with you post-show in the wrap-up. I'll hand it over to Scott and incorporate it into things. All right. Well, let's see. Jumping back to the year accountability died. Again, before Trump, if you had asked Americans what was the one thing that could disqualify a party from future participation in democratic politics, they may well have said trying to steal a presidential election. And yet, the people who attempted to corruptly and on January 6th violently overthrow the 2020 presidential election, and I mean the government, why not just say it, are still controlling the Republican Party. And rather than work daily to hold the GOP accountable, our top political journalists are glibly projecting that it will take Congress in 2022 and possibly the White House in 2024. This failure to hold Trump to account has been consistent ever since he declared his candidacy. When he actually won in 2016, the heads of our major newsrooms made a terrible mistake. They clung to their devotion to treating both political parties with equal deference, even though that meant abandoning even more fundamental commitment to truth-telling and accountability. Balanced treatment of a profoundly unbalanced situation normalized Trump's and his party's behavior, no matter how dishonest, extreme, and anti-democratic it was. Well before January 6th, Trump had thoroughly proven himself to be dangerous, inept at governing, corrupt, and demagogic. In one of my first columns for Press Watch in October of 2019, I wrote that the main storyline of the 2020 election should be that we made a terrible mistake in 2016 and we need to fix it. Then, a year ago, the full extent of Trump's degradation burst into public view. For a day or two, even the most unflappable journalists had no alternative but to acknowledge he had crossed the line. It had happened, undeniably, right in front of everyone's eyes. Trump incites mob, proclaimed the New York Times banner headline the next morning. The storming of the Capitol by Trump supporters amounted to an attempted coup that they hoped would overturn the election he lost, wrote the Washington Post. It was a breathtaking demonstration of what Trump has wrought, a mob as heedless of law and norms as he has been, willing to literally trash the fundamental institutions of American democracy, wrote the Los Angeles Times. But within a few days, this sense of journalistic outrage had somehow been quenched. That's not to say that the coverage of the Republican Party since then has been what you would call positive. These days, reporters will state without hesitation that the GOP accepts as an article of faith something that didn't happen, and that Trump tried to steal the election. They'll note that Republicans are literally killing themselves rather than trust scientists. Sometimes, rarely, they'll even write that the threats of violence are becoming commonplace among a significant segment of the Republican Party, or that the GOP has allied with right-wing militias, or that the party spreads hate speech. In a particularly terrifying December 30th article, the Associated Press's Nicholas Riccardi wrote plainly that Trump-aligned Republicans are working to clear the path for the next insurrection. But our elite media can't bring itself to say what kind of party that is. They won't describe it as, say, dangerously delusional, or anti-democratic, or nativist, or know-nothing, or fascist. They won't say that the party has crossed the line and hold it accountable for doing so. With the notable exception of that AP story mentioned above, mainstream news coverage of the various Republican election moves to restrict voting, to put loyalists in charge of vote counting, and to make it easier for partisans to overturn legitimate voting results, has fallen dramatically short of stating the obvious conclusion that the party is preparing to steal future elections. Consider, for instance, this shockingly understated New York Times explainer about voting rights and the battle over elections, what to know. Great. Know everything you can, really, but okay, what to know, that's the title. While full of solid information, it nonetheless casts the, quote, battle over voting rights as taking place on a, quote, partisan battlefield. But it's not Democrats versus Republicans here. It's us who support democracy versus them who don't. Most accountability failures these days are in plain sight and stem from a failure of journalists to pursue consequences for lying. As I wrote last year in my column on what the next generation of editors need to tell their political reporters, reporters should demand retractions from liars, publicly and repeatedly. They should deny serial liars the opportunity to use the media to spread their lies. When forced to quote liars, they should warn readers. They should overtly distinguish between people who, whatever their political views, have established a record of acting in bad faith or in good. This should be a top priority for reporters and editors and publishers. In a world with no consequences for lying, fact-based journalism has little value. That's worth pointing out. The journalism profession failed to confront the Bush-Cheney regime for its lies about going to war, and lies to cover up the lies about the war, lies about torture and surveillance, and lies about Valerie Plame, Dick Cheney's lies, criminally prosecutable, but for his chief of staff, Scooter Libby's lies. It is so surprising, or rather, is it so surprising? He's asking, is it so surprising that the next Republican president would take lying to a new extreme, not necessarily in terms of severity, but certainly in terms of volume? These days, the big lie is at the heart of the anti-democratic movement. But the big lie isn't just a big lie, it's also a promise, and without consequences, it becomes a reality. There are, unfortunately, countless ways that mainstream news reporters fail to hold the Republican Party accountable. Among them, we have some bullet points here. They write with justified horror about the anti-vaccine movement, but fail to call out how Republican officials and Fox News are intentionally and unforgivably using the issue to incite their base. They describe the GOP's appeal to racism and its manufacturing of white panic as clever politics. They let Republican leaders take the credit for solving crises they themselves have created. They don't press Republicans to describe what they would actually do if they were in charge. They decry polarization without stating who's at fault. They fail to confront, condemn, and punish Fox's propaganda and disinformation channel for spreading lies and inciting conspiracy theorists. They normalize and almost totally overlook the constant Republican obstruction of any progress toward better health care, preventing climate change, reducing inequality, and so on, only rarely noting the enormous human costs. Instead, they focus obsessively on democratic squabbling. Some accountability failures have continued into the Biden presidency. For instance, it's been clear since the dawn of COVID that omnipresent testing was a necessity. Reporters should have been clamoring for that during the Trump presidency and during the last year as well. And while it's really great that a congressional committee is collecting evidence about the January 6th sacking of the Capitol, its pace is way too slow and the coverage too demure. Why is any of this secret? This is not the kind of investigation that needs confidentiality. Quite the contrary. Reporters should be constantly demanding that congressional investigators tell them more of what they're digging up, and they should follow up themselves, including by relentlessly hounding the people who are refusing to talk. The New York Times reported on Tuesday that the committee is rushing to make as much progress as possible before January 2023 because Republicans are favored to regain control of the House this fall, and if they do, that is when they would take power and almost certainly dissolve the inquiry. That's not rushing, and it's obviously not fast enough. Televised hearings, hopefully starting soon, will be a good start, but the most important stuff may not be televised, and an interim report set for summer is not nearly fast enough. It's long been clear that after Trump, there would be a huge need for reform, that Congress, civil society, and the executive branch itself would have to take steps to address the huge flaws in the American political system that Trump exposed and exploited. A huge number of Trump actions need to be condemned, rescinded, and even more explicitly outlawed. Why isn't that happening? Who's pushing for reforms, and who's blocking them? These are crucial questions reporters should be demanding answers to every day. Here, for instance, is one blueprint from the ethics watchdog group Crew on one essential element of what should be a massive reform movement, holding presidents accountable. It calls for more robust methods to force presidents to release their tax returns and divest from their businesses, to enforce the emoluments clauses, to prevent abuses of the pardon power, and more. Or consider the need to revisit just one of Trump's many reckless acts, the inflammatory, unprecedented, and flatly illegal drone strike assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in Iraq in January of 2020. Press coverage at the time was credulous and naive, but as Brian Finucane, a former State Department legal advisor, recently wrote for Just Security, a set of extreme legal opinions drafted during the Trump administration to justify the president's actions now lie ready to be used by future presidents and must be disavowed and rescinded. Repeatedly calling out the Republican Party as unfit and undeserving to compete in democratic elections sounds awfully partisan, but wanting to hold the powerful accountable is hardly an endorsement of the Democratic Party. In fact, outside of the media, one of the biggest reasons for the low expectations of accountability for government officials is the precedent set by Barack Obama when he refused to hold anyone accountable for the Bush-Cheney administration's torture of detainees. Sounds familiar. Not demanding some form of justice or recrimination from a president, vice president on down, the people who proposed, approved, or performed brutal and unforgivable acts on human beings was one of the most disappointing things ever for those of us who consider ourselves accountability journalists. It's not too late for genuine accountability journalism to make a difference, although it may be soon. The most urgent issue of the moment is protecting the country from ongoing assaults on the election process by the Republican Party that truly threaten to establish permanent minority rule. As Mother Jones CEO Monica Bauerlein wrote in December, it's the story that journalists should be shouting from the rooftops and reporting out from every angle every day. As the Washington Post media columnist Margaret Sullivan wrote this week, For the most part, news organizations are not making democracy under siege a central focus of the work they present to the public. It doesn't appear to be part of an overall editorial plan that fully recognizes just how much trouble we're in. That must change. Yes, shout it from the rooftops. Our country's future depends on it. Okay, soaring rhetoric at the end. But good points, solid points from Dan Frumkin, and making for an excellent segue into the accountability issues. All right, a couple other things happening that I think deserve some inclusion, perhaps at the outset of the week here. A couple weeks ago, I scared everybody to death with the reports of what Russia seemed to be up to with respect to Ukraine and placement of strategic arms in Europe and elsewhere, and that there was a strange asymmetry in the way it was being reported in Russia and in the United States. In the United States, we had no idea whatsoever that there was anything out of the ordinary going on. And in Russia, they wanted very badly for, at least for Americans, to believe that they were broadcasting to Russians that we were on the brink of nuclear war. And that was somewhat disconcerting. But there's other weird developments in the, I don't know what, under the same umbrella, I guess. One of which I am fairly certain that I saw and put aside, but now I can no longer find it. But I did see some of the, and I'll admit it was some of the usual suspects in terms of suspicion about what Russia was up to. But I'm pretty sure I'll try and find something and dig it up on this. But I had seen somewhere that, like for instance, when I say the usual suspects, is it Bill Browder? Is that the name of the American businessman who was, I think, close with, is it Simone Magnitsky, named for whom the Magnitsky Act was named. Yeah, Bill Browder, I think, who had been commenting on this, and I thought this was a scary idea, but he was, I mean, I haven't seen it verified anywhere, but maybe if I can find the tweet in which he makes this accusation. Let me see if I can look it up. But the accusation was that I think, did I have it right, whether it was Dutch, not Danish, but Dutch pilots who, on behalf of NATO, I guess, were flying security missions over, here it is, over the Baltics. All right, I did find it, and there is an article that goes with it. I'll see if it's in English, but as he says, real mafia stuff. Russians have been making threatening calls, like phone calls, to the wives and girlfriends of the Dutch NATO pilots who have been protecting the Baltics. That's an interesting and new tactic of war I had not thought of. I suppose in the scope of total war and the possibility that you could all be annihilated in a nuclear conflagration, all of us anyway, threatening phone calls don't really rank. But I guess if in a Cold War situation, that seems like a new twist. Now the link is to something from the NL, as in Netherlands, NL Times.nl, so coming out of the Netherlands. I don't know whether the Netherlands Times is a actual, paper publication, and this is their web version, or whether it's one of those amalgamation things that take in two or more papers. But maybe those of you with more experience with the Netherlands might know offhand. Russians, and it's in quotes here, I guess they don't really know exactly who they're dealing with. And that's one of the real weird things about the blurring of the lines in Russia between the government and the quasi-government, the oligarchs, the mobster versions of the oligarchs, if they're not all mobsters. You just have to write this in scare quotes. Russians, quote-unquote, threatening Dutch F-16 pilot's family, at least one of them anyway. The partners of Dutch fighter pilots who were active in Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania in 2017. That's interesting. And this is actually an old article now that I look at it, now that I can see this is from 2019. So I guess, I don't know whether that means it's likely to be continuing. I don't know whether Dutch patrols of the Baltics continue at this point, but I don't know whether it's continuing or something that's just shifting, or maybe we can expect the same and more for our own pilots. Maybe it's something they think they can get away with Dutch pilots and not anybody else. I don't know. But the partners of Dutch fighter pilots who were active in Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania in 2017 were harassed at home during this period. They received repeated unpleasant phone calls from people with a Russian accent, or maybe a fake one, who asked whether their men should not rather leave the area, among other things, the Telegraph reports. It's Telegraph with two A's because it's Dutch. Military Intelligence Service, MIVD, told the newspaper that it is familiar with this practice but would not say anything further about it. According to the newspaper, the women often received these calls after their husbands or boyfriends called them from their personal phones. The person on the line, with a Russian-sounding accent, asked things like what their husband was doing there, what she thought about it, and whether it would be better if he left the area. So very mobsterish, definitely true. At the time, Dutch F-16 fighter jets participated in the Baltic Air Police, patrolling the Baltic airspace. While the Dutch F-16s are no longer in the area, and that was as of 2019, the Netherlands still has a large military presence in Lithuania. A total of 270 Dutch soldiers form part of a NATO force that has been present there since 2017. According to the newspaper, this is a signal to Russia that NATO will not accept an attack on the Baltic states following the annexation of Crimea. The MIVD used to publish figures in its annual report on incidents involving the partners of defense staff. This practice stopped years ago. According to the newspaper, the harassment of family members is a sensitive issue within the armed forces. It's for this reason, apart from commanders, deployed soldiers no longer release their full names. They are only known by their rank and first name. This practice started during the Uruzgan mission, when defense feared that terrorists would take revenge on the relatives of soldiers who fought the Taliban. As far as is known, that never happened. Well, that is pretty interesting and scary. And a couple of other weird things that also need further investigation just to understand exactly what's going on here. I got a couple other things that I'll hit just quickly because we only have minutes left. Reuters carried this weird news. Denmark accuses Russia, China, and Iran of espionage threat. And I guess, is this accompanied by the tweet that brought it to my attention? I guess not. But there was something that jumped out about that. Let's see if we can find it in a quick read here. Denmark warned on Thursday of a rising espionage threat from Russia, China, and Iran and others, including in the Arctic region, where global powers are jostling for resources and sea routes. The Danish Security and Intelligence Service said there had been numerous examples of attempted spying on Denmark, whose active global role had helped make it a tempting target. The threat from foreign intelligence activities against Denmark, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands has increased in recent years. Anders Henriksen, head of counterintelligence at the Danish Security and Intelligence Service, said in a report, Greenland and the Faroe Islands are sovereign territories under the Kingdom of Denmark and also members of the Arctic Council Forum. Copenhagen handles most of their foreign and security matters. The report cited a 2019, going back in time again, incident of a forged letter, this is why it was in the news, purporting to be from Greenland's foreign minister to a U.S. senator, saying an independence referendum was in the offing. It is highly likely that the letter was fabricated and shared on the internet by Russian influence agents who wanted to create confusion and a possible conflict between Denmark, the USA, and Greenland. Pardon me. The Russians, of course, deny this. By the way, I noticed, I don't know if it's discussed in this article or now I remember the tweet that brought it to my attention. The letter purporting to be from, I guess, the Prime Minister of of Greenland, is that even right? To U.S. Senator Tom Cotton. And that it came actually in the middle of the weird discussion, remember this from the Trump administration, about buying Greenland or somehow otherwise acquiring rights of sovereignty over Greenland, of all things. Just the strangest idea, and seemingly from out of nowhere. And it occurred right in the middle of all of this. And apparently it was Tom Cotton who made this suggestion to Trump. And then we find out Cotton was getting faked or allegedly fake letters from the government of Greenland talking about there being an independence referendum. And it is entirely unclear what the hell would interest Tom Cotton about this at all. Anyway, we're about a minute late in starting our outro music, so apologies to Justice Putnam for pushing him back just a little bit. Anyway, I thought that was really weird and just worth looking back on, even though there's a number of other things that are much more current and concerning. But I don't know. I do feel like we want to keep an eye on what's going on to the east. There's also more in the, I guess, on the topic. And that, for instance, the New York Times report from just the other day that the U.S. says Russia sent saboteurs into Ukraine to create a pretext for invasion. The Russians obviously denying this as well, but apparently the idea being to, I don't know, create some sort of false flag incident that the Russians could point to and say American interference is what was doing this to our troops, or endangering or even killing Russian or Russian allied troops, and we're going to have to restore order by marching in. So far, we managed to get through the weekend without that happening, but certainly escalating tensions and escalating use of weird and unusual tactics that I guess you might expect coming out of a mobster oligarchy. It's becoming more and more apparent that there's no serious governance going on in Russia, sad to say.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, we'll leave it to Justice Putnam to turn the focus back to American politics, even though he will make a survey of politics and news from around the world. Look at this. A former advisor to Vice President Mike Pence spoke about a meeting between ex-Trump staffers focused on preventing Trump's future influence in U.S. politics. Wouldn't that be nice? Stay tuned for more about that next.